I mean, this is a topic that it's been talked about many, many times. But I know that the extent of research that you've done around this, um, I do have satellite telescopic photographs of the moon showing the lander, or what looks like the lander, and track marks and this, that, and the other. They are put out. You can obtain them. Secondly, question is, why would Apollo go at the time when it's the most dangerous time to go to the moon? Why could they just not set? I mean, surely they must have known about the Van Allen radiation belt. And were they in such a rush that that was the red herring that stuck out to say, well, you didn't take that into consideration? Of course you should do. I mean, every single thing, was taken in consideration. And when Alan Bean, the astronaut, was asked question about, went to the moon, the Van Allen radiation belt, I'm sure he said, I'm not too sure if he went through it.
Yeah, he did.
Twice.
Twice. Yep.
And I thought, well, that was quite amusing. And is it the fact that, when I look at the photography, and don't get me wrong, I will hold my hands up and say, yes, very, very questionable photographs, especially, the one of the Earth from the lunar surface. The Earth is clearly too far away, on that image. We know that. You can mathematically work that out.
Yeah.
But problems like, well, there's the moon buggy, and where's the tracks? There's no tracks. It's like it's just been dropped on there and taken some very professional photographs of it. A lot of them are look to be very professionalized photographs taken at the highest times of, this is, if you're on the lunar surface, you're facing possibly death at any time because of microscopic lunar impacts, which are apparently happening all the time. And you have to take that into consideration, the radiation, anything that could go wrong. It's feasible to me to say there must be a backup plan, because the inevitable thing, which beyond and all everything, would be the fact that our astronauts aren't going to make it to the moon, to the Apollo mission. What do we do if they don't? Well, if we, do we go to all that huge amount of expense and huge amount of effort to just say, sorry, guys, let's tell the world we all failed? Or the backup plan is to say, let's create the process that we got there, and that stand for our evidence of being there, and we actually managed to do it, managed to pull it off. The evidence I see is very questionable, but then there are some interesting things that are being thrown out. I don't know if they're fake or not, but for instance, the lander and tracks on the moon, there either have been, or they sent them there somehow, or they're fake. Or they went at a different time and a different date, and most interestingly, probably using maybe even a different technology. Who knows? What do you think about that, Marcus? About what?
Okay, that's a good summary of it. Now, most people will be familiar with the Apollo story, the giant rocket going off. That was real. 2 minutes after that rocket took off, it disappears from view.
Yes.
Until the 3 big black and white, red and white parachutes open over the Pacific 8 days later, in the case of Apollo 11, we have to rely on NASA to tell us what's going to happen next.
That's right, yes.
If NASA stands for never a straight answer,
and still does,
do we believe them? Do we believe everything that NASA tells us is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Well, that's usually because people will say absolutely not, because there's been plenty of times and they've demonstrated that they've not told the truth, regards other things. Yeah.
Okay. My view is very simple. Apollo was a brilliantly executed propaganda exercise to demonstrate to the world the superiority of American technology over that of the Soviet Union as it was then.
Mm.
You have to put Apollo into the context of its time to understand why it was necessary to fake it, because it was faked. The whole thing was faked. And I can now prove it was faked.
Mm.
Very simple.
So the process, you know, there was a film that came out called Interstellar. I don't know if you actually just got to see that, but it was a very interesting comment in that movie about they accepted the fact that the lunar landings were fake and was done for the reason to bankrupt Russia. And I thought that was interesting. Just
Yeah.
to throw that into a film. Of course, I know Russia were desperately trying to, because they were winning the space race by all accounts. You had to hold your hands up and say, these guys are the best, you know, they've done everything.
Absolutely. They were winning it. They'd been first. I mean, don't forget the context of its time. 1961, John Kennedy, President Kennedy, charismatic, young, popular, well, popular in some places, new president. He'd only been in office 5 months when on May the 26th, 1961, he stood up in Congress and said, we're going to land a man on the moon before the decade is out and return him safely to the Earth.
Right.
No American had been into space other than Alan Shepard at that point.
Mm.
This comment was made, this statement was made in response to Yuri Gagarin orbiting the Earth 6 weeks earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Now, 2 months earlier to that, Kennedy had to deal with the Bay of Pigs fiasco.
Yes.
So Kennedy needed some distraction to demonstrate that he was a president who could bring America forward into the technological age. He didn't know if they could land a man on the moon. He had no idea. Nobody else did either. The first American to orbit the Earth was John Glenn over a year later.
Yes, that's right. John Glenn's flies. I remember him saying.
Yeah, I think it was October, November 1962.
That's right, yes.
That's around the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis, at the same time. So there was this weird event going on in America. There were things going on in America which Kennedy had to deal with as president, because that's what presidents do. They deal with it and reassure the people that everything is going to be okay. So Kennedy had to come up with something. Now, he was starting to get involved in the Vietnam War.
Yes.
Which became very unpopular.
Well, yes. Yeah.
Kennedy had to do something about it, had to do something about this depressing situation that he'd inherited. So landing a man on the moon would be the best way to go about it. But nobody knew how to do it. They hadn't got the rockets to do it. They hadn't got the astronauts to do it. They all had to be trained. They had to build the equipment to do it, the rockets, the landers, control centers. I mean, it's a huge undertaking. And yet, July 1969, we're told that Armstrong and Aldrin landed on the moon. How wonderful is that?
Did you get that? What's the return on that? What is the return of going to the moon? I mean, you look at, you know, American taxpayers, they put their hand in their pocket, and it's about, what did it accumulate to the Apollo mission to go to the moon cost-wise? How did it, you know, I mean, how did it get it back? What's the reward?
There's no obvious reward other than political.
Political, yes.
It was a political event. This wasn't a scientific event.
No,
it was a
political event.
It was political because America had to be seen to be superior to the Soviet Union. How is the best way to show the world America has done what they said they were going to do? Do it on television, especially live on television.
Oh, yeah.
That's what they did.
Yes.
We all saw I'm idiot enough to have stayed up to about 3:30 in the morning in July the 20th when they allegedly landed. Yes. And I watched it and I thought, wow, that's wonderful.
Well, that's yeah, exactly.
I hadn't thought it through, which is what I always say, that everybody should just think it through. Now, the way you can demonstrate that this thing was complete fabrication is as simple as this. This is photographic film.
Yes.
Photographic film was what was used at the time. There was no digital cameras at the time. They were all photographic film cameras. And that's photographic film. It's a plastic backing with a light-sensitive emulsion coated onto it. What are the conditions near to the moon in space? Yeah. You've got three major problems. Three. Yes. You've got the heat from the sun. You've got the radiation. You've already referred to that, the Van Allen radiation belts. But radiation doesn't stop at the Van Allen radiation belts. It goes on all the way to the sun and further. Radiation is in space.
Yes, it's a toxic. It's
toxic.
Yeah,
and when the belts are, those Van Allen radiation belts are named after Professor James Van Allen.
that's just the peaks. That's just where it rises to certain.
Exactly. It's the peak of it.
Yeah.
Space is radioactive was his first reaction when they got the information back, by the simple expedient of putting a Geiger counter onto the first American rocket that was launched, Explorer 1, and the reading off the Geiger counter was such that James Van Allen said, space is radioactive, because the readings just went up and up and up.
Exactly. I mean, they do mess up sometimes. I mean, NASA announced some time back when they were utilizing the shuttle that, and it was a news item, it come from NASA, the source, and 4 astronauts had gone to the furthest that they'd gone out into space, which is 200 miles. It's the furthest that they'd ever traveled in the space shuttle.
Yeah.
The unfortunate effects of that, though, that there was all of them were seriously affected from radiation, and they had to get them back quickly, and they had to be isolated and treated for a considerable length of time.
Yeah.
And I think, well, that's in the space shuttle. You know,
not very far.
Not very far.
How far's the moon?
Yeah.
240,000 miles. It's a long way. But the third problem, we've got the heat, we've got the radiation. The third problem is the biggest of them all. It's the vacuum of space. There's nothing there, hence the vacuum. And the further away from Earth you go, the harder the vacuum becomes.
Yes.
When you get to the moon, the vacuum is thousands of times harder than the vacuum anywhere near Earth. Now, you can create vacuum, and you've probably seen the little experiments you maybe did at school, where you get a vacuum chamber and you've got a pump, and you pump the air out of the chamber, and if you put a bowl of water inside the vacuum chamber, the bowl starts to boil, or apparently starts to boil, but it's not from heat.
Yes.
What's happening is called outgassing, where you've got the lighter elements, in this case in water, the hydrogen, the oxygen, are being released by the reduction in pressure. Here on Earth, we exist under 14.7 pound per square inch of atmospheric pressure. That's the weight of the air above us at sea level. 14.7 pound per square inch is quite a lot. We don't notice it because our bodies are designed.
Pressurized, designed.
Yeah, we're designed. Now, if you climb Mount Everest, you're 5 miles, just over 5 miles up into the atmosphere. The atmospheric pressure on the top of Mount Everest is 5 pound per square inch. There's much less atmosphere. And people have real trouble surviving. That's why above 26,000 feet, it's called the death zone.
Yes.
Because that's what happens if you get into a lack of pressure. There isn't enough pressure to force the oxygen into your lungs against the back pressure holding it back.
Exactly.
Because we've got pressure inside our bodies. We don't notice it.
No.
Which is why we take blood pressure readings. So if the pressure inside our bodies is too great to allow oxygen to enter in sufficient quantity to keep us alive, we're dead, hence the death zone.
Yes.
Now, that's only 5 miles up.
I know.
I mean, 200 miles up in the space shuttle, you're into severe lack of pressure. So you've got to take it all with you. When you get to the moon, right, atmospheric pressure or vacuum levels are measured in a unit called torr, T-O-R-R, named after Evangelista Torricelli, who's an Italian scientist who developed the barometer, which measures pressure.
Yes.
Torr, T-O-R-R. So at sea level, it's 760 torr, T-O-R-R, because that's the atmospheric pressure. You get to what's called the Kármán line. The Kármán line is it's an artificial measurement, but it's designed to show where space begins and the atmosphere finishes. It's named after Professor Theodor von Karman, who was a Hungarian scientist who worked for NASA in the late 1950s, early 1960s. And he decided it was necessary to identify where space began, because when you get to space, there's so little atmosphere that aircraft cannot work. Jet engines don't work in space.
Mm.
Rockets will work in space, and there isn't enough atmosphere for the control panels on an aircraft to operate.
Mm.
He identified that. He said it was 100 kilometers above the Earth's surface. In fact, space begins a little bit lower than that, about 50 miles above, 62 kilometers, 60 odd kilometers. But he decided to use 100 kilometers because, as he said, it was easier to remember.
Yes.
So the Kármán line is where space begins. Above the Kármán line, you've got increased vacuum. Now, when you've got photographic film, this stuff, if people haven't used a photographic film camera as opposed to a digital camera, you must know that there's a major difference between the way that pictures are recorded on a photographic film to a digital camera. Now, photographic film, as I said, is coated with a light-sensitive emulsion. That was started life as a liquid.
Yeah.
That's how it's made. It's not rocket science. That's just how films are made. Emulsion coating a plastic backing. The emulsion outgasses in a vacuum.
Right.
And we've demonstrated this. Some friends of mine in Canada went out, and when they heard the story, and I'll tell you where I got the story from originally, they went out and bought a vacuum chamber, a relatively small thing, about the size of a wheelie bin, not very big, and they put photographic film in it. They bought the right sort of film, ester-based, polyester-based film, which was used on Apollo. They put it into the vacuum chamber for about 24 hours, which is how long that they were in on Apollo 17. That's how long the spacewalks lasted.
Yes.
And took it out of the vacuum chamber, put it in a camera, took photographs with it, developed it, the correct process for the ectochrome film that was being used on Apollo. And it is visibly affected by a relatively low level of vacuum. Visibly affected. It's fogged.
Yes.
Means the contrast is reduced. The color balance is also wrong. The blues are not blue, the reds are not red, the greens are not green. They're all changed. It's all to do with the frequencies. It's all to do with the emulsion being damaged by the vacuum. So no photograph could have been taken on the lunar surface by the named astronauts because the film would have been damaged by the much higher levels of vacuum that we can obtain here on Earth. We've had it confirmed in the University of Athens. Professor there watched our film of our experiment with the vacuum chamber and said, I think you're right, but let me just test it out myself. He got film, put it into his professional vacuum chamber, got the same result. In fact, he was so worried about his, this is a vacuum chamber costing tens of thousands of pounds.
Yes.
And they are, the vacuum is created by turbo pumps removing the air from the vacuum chamber.
Well, that's a big thing, because everything really is relying on what, like you said, what we've been told from NASA, or what they've presented as evidence of being there, which is video and
film.
Video and film. Yeah. That's
it.
Yeah.
So if the film could not survive in a vacuum, and the immediate response will be, well, they must have pressurized the cameras. And no, they didn't pressurize the camera, because there are so many pictures of the cameras allegedly on the lunar surface that are not pressurized. I've actually handled the Lunar Hasselblad.
Yes.
Which is a replica of the cameras that were used on Apollo. It's held at Hasselblad, UK. And if you ask them very nicely and explain why you want to, they'll bring one along. It's accompanied by a security guard.
I can imagine.
Reasonably enough, because it's quite a valuable camera. It looks just like a regular Hasselblad, but it's got no viewfinder, and it's got little levers on the shutter speed, aperture ring, and focus, because it's all done manually.
Yes, I couldn't see.
It's not a point and shoot camera.
Just, yeah.
That's the Hasselblad camera. You had to operate it. The only automatic feature on it was the batteries in vacuum, batteries that wound the film on for the next exposure. And between pressing the shutter button, which you couldn't see from inside your spacesuit, by the way, on a Hasselblad, the shutter button is on the front of the camera.
Oh, yes.
You couldn't see it. And you also couldn't see the little dial on the side of the camera, which told you if you got a picture or not. Because obviously in space, no one can hear you scream. Nobody can hear a camera going click.
That's right.
What you hear is the mirror getting out of the way of the lens. So all that, combined with the fact that there is no damage visible on the 5,771 photographs allegedly taken on the lunar surface to show damage by the vacuum, I would say, and I would want, if somebody can prove me wrong on this, I've asked for 30 years for people to prove me wrong, when I say that no human, us delicate little creatures, no human has flown to, landed on, walked across, and returned from the moon. Nobody. It's all faked, deliberately.
Yeah, why did he think he did when he did? Why then though? Why at a time? If they'd waited, gone earlier, or waited to go later, it would have been more acceptable to and believable to do so, rather than go at the peak times when the Valhalla radiation belt is at its highest peak.
They had to do it, and they had to do it by the end of the decade, i.e., by the end of 1969, to honor their now dead president's challenge.
Right.
So they had to be seen to do it. Now, who was president when they allegedly landed on the moon? Richard Nixon.
Nixon, yeah, Nixon.
That was July 1969. He'd been president about 6 months at that point. He'd been inaugurated in January 1969, having been elected in 1968. And then we had the whole Watergate fiasco.
Yes, we did.
Which got him kicked out of office because he lied.
Yes.
You know, you start lying at that level, and you get found out.
Yes.
You haven't got long to last. So they had to do it by the end of the decade, because that was what Kennedy, who is now dead, had said that they should do.
Yeah.
So where was it done? This is the point which, and people will say, well, it's Area 51. No, nothing to do with Area 51.
Well, I know that they had their own locations, because I've got photography. I've got the lunar landscape where they did the testing and stuff, which is a mock-up of identical, even by visual. It was an identical. I'll be able to tell the difference. Yeah. I've got all those shots, and even the models that they made with the cameras and the film tracks going around, so it looks like the actual location is over the lunar surface, orbiting, and it looks like they're really there. And they had filming of that. There's actually film and photographs of the setup for it.
Yeah.
No, everything's there.
And the Sea of Tranquility, i.e. the place where Apollo 11 was due to land, was created life-size at Flagstaff in Arizona. And the US Geological Survey had taken the photographs that were taken previously on the lunar orbiter, not the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. That's quite different. The lunar orbiter, which flew in 1966, photographing, this is when they were trying to do it, photographing, hopefully, landing sites for Apollo. And so they had a lot of photographs showing what the place would look like. Now, there's an interesting point. I said that film cannot survive in a vacuum. How do I know that? 2 reasons. I attended a lecture in London organized by the British Interplanetary Society, of which I'm a member, in 2018. The lecture was given by a gentleman by the name of Phil Pressel. Phil Pressel worked on the Hexagon spy satellite, KH9. He worked specifically on the camera system of the spy satellite, whose job it was to fly in orbit, flying about 150, 200 miles above the surface, photographing Russian rocket sites, photographing Russian air, things that America wanted to know. How was the missile gap being created? Was it bigger or was it smaller? The bomber gap. They wanted information, so they were going to photograph it from the spy satellite. Phil Pressel's job was to make the camera that would photograph from an orbiting spacecraft traveling at 17,000 miles an hour. So you would get movement unless you could restrict the movement of the apparent movement of the rocket over the surface.
Yes.
A very sophisticated piece of camera equipment. And he was rightly very proud of it. It was a stereo camera equipment as well. So it photographed two cameras photographing the same subject, and you could identify then heights of rockets, lengths of ships. It was what was needed. He was very proud of having done it. And because the equipment had been classified, nobody could talk about it till 2011. He was now able to talk about it. He was now able to discuss it. And he made the point during his talk when he was describing the camera equipment. Well, of course, we had to pressurize the film. It was using photographic film, this stuff.
Yeah.
Using photographic film in the camera on the spy satellite. We had to keep the film under a degree of pressure, not very much, about 1 to 2 pounds per square inch. And he showed the tubes through which the film would travel from the 30-mile reels of film that were carried, because they were using a lot of film. The whole area was pressurized. And he said it was pressurized with these nitrogen gas bottles. And he showed us on the thing. And he showed tubes through which the film would travel, the rollers through which it would go over. They're all pressurized.
Very sophisticated just to get past the problem of pressure.
Of pressure, that's it. Now, the only other satellite that has used photographic film in space, I mentioned earlier, the Lunar Orbiter.
Yes.
Photographing the lunar surface, 1966. This is before the Hexagon spy satellite. That was 1971. 1971. I found the diagrams of the schematics of the creation, of the construction of the Lunar Orbiter. And guess what? There's a big thing. It says pressure chamber.
Right.
The whole camera equipment of the
Pressure chamber.
The Lunar Orbiter is pressurized for the same reason.
Yes.
Photographic film will be destroyed in a vacuum. Now, the film would photograph the areas they wanted to photograph, the proposed landing sites. And then that film was carried through a system on the spacecraft similar to the Polaroid camera system, which would develop photographic film with chemicals.
Yes.
And most people have used Polaroid film. One of the major contributors to the design of the Lunar Orbiter was the designer of the Polaroid system.
Right.
Lund, I think his name was. Anyway, so you got the Lunar Orbiter using photographic film in pressurized environment, Hexagon spy satellite using photographic film in a pressurized environment. So you fly to the moon with Apollo and you don't have any pressurization, the film would be wrecked. Hence, you can demonstrate that the Apollo missions were faked because there was no evidence of it happening.
Yes. The evidence is taking off and coming back.
Yeah.
In between.
Whether they went into Earth orbit, which is most likely what happened, or people would see them. Nobody was looking for them. And NASA had thought of that. They had a satellite called the Tetra A satellite, testing and training A. There would be a B that followed. Testing and training. It was launched in 1967 in order to allow the technicians at Houston, who were controlling the whole operation, to work under the conditions they would expect to have if signals were coming back from the moon. So this satellite was launched. They would transmit up to the satellite what was required to be transmitted back to Earth so that technicians could listen to it. And as Gene Kranz, who was one of the mission controllers of Apollo 11, said, we couldn't tell the difference between a real transmission and a simulated transmission.
Right.
So if they can't tell the difference, who else could? But I hear you say, people were listening in and they heard these. Oh, yes. Where are the recordings of these?
Are they relayed from somewhere else? Where are the original source? Where are they coming from?
Basinger, I think his name was, who was supposed to have done it. But there's no recording of it. It's just his statement.
Right.
He may well have been listening into the Tetra A satellite, same as everybody else was.
He wouldn't have known the difference.
Yeah. Now, at this point, also people will say, but the Chinese have identified it and the Indians have identified Apollo on the lunar surface. No, they haven't. They've said they have. The Chinese are very clever. They're good chess players, the Chinese. The Russians are very good chess players too.
Well, surely, Marcus, at some point now, I mean, if this was, of course, the space race and the situation that we have at Russia at the time, at what point do you think they would have realized what was going on? And then why did not Russian come forward? And what did they gain from not coming forward and saying that, America's lied?
Good question. Good question. Good point. Okay. Why didn't the Russians blow the whistle?
Yeah.
Because they were leading, as you said, they were leading the space race at this point, right up to the time when they decided, no, we're not going to do it. The Jodrell Bank radio telescope near Manchester.
Yes, I've been there a few times. Yeah.
Yeah, that was created and controlled at the time by Bernard Lovell.
Yes.
Who became Sir Bernard Lovell.
Mm-hmm.
And he was asked by the Soviet Union at the time if they would help them track their craft in space. And he agreed with the full knowledge of the American and British government. So he agreed that he would work with the Soviet Union to help them track their spacecraft. And in doing that, he had to go to Russia several times, which he did. And he actually said at one point, when are you going to send men to the moon? When the Soviet Union going to send men to the moon? And they said, we will be sending men to the moon when we can ensure their safe return due to the dangers of radiation.
Yes.
This was in the early 1960s.
Yes.
So they knew perfectly well the dangers of radiation. They assumed the Americans knew the dangers too. Now, if the Americans decided they were going to fly into this radiation soup that surrounds Earth, they must have found a way to overcome it, they would think. Now, look at why didn't the Russians blow the whistle then if they suspected that America were lying? There are two reasons. The first one is that in 1968, Russia has one major export product called natural gas.
Yes.
They have in huge quantities in Siberia, and they can ship it into Western Europe, and they would make a lot of money. So there was something was created called pipes for gas. West Germany, as it was at the time, would make the pipes because their industry was sufficiently advanced that they could make the 2,000 kilometers of 4-foot diameter pipe to convey the gas from Siberia into Western Europe. The first countries to receive that gas was West Germany, as it was then, Italy, and Austria.
Right.
The contracts were signed in September 1968.
Oh,
Now, Russia couldn't care less about somebody prancing around on the moon. They were concerned with getting their one major export commodity to a position where they could receive finance for it, receive money for it. They weren't about to blow that particular action to say, oh, look, America's prancing on the moon. We know they can't do it. What? How would it benefit them to say that?
yes.
Because they'd also, these things happen. Russia experienced a famine. They had a failure of their crop, their wheat crop, in the early 1970s. Russia was supplied with wheat from America at a very advantageous price. Do you think they were going to jeopardize that, which was feeding the nation? Of course not. This is politics. So even if Russia knew that America couldn't land on the moon, how would it benefit them to say so?
Yes, true.
Of course it wouldn't.
No.
Same way that it doesn't benefit China to say it today.
Yes.
They will say, we have seen evidence of Apollo on the moon. That's what they said.
So what's it going to take, Marcus? I mean, you know, we there's sometimes these little mistakes that astronauts make, even when they're being interviewed from the International Space Station, when they say, one day we will get to the moon. You think, do you not mean one day we will return? You know,
Well,
they do make little slip-ups like that. But what is it going to take if we ever? Because it wasn't long ago, I sent you a photograph, and it was a demonstration of 2 foot or 3 foot thick aluminium slab.
yeah,
And it was a pea-size object hitting it at the velocity of what Apollo would have been traveling at. And
yeah,
it buried itself in as a crater about 1 to 1.5 feet in depth with these micro collisions, according to, you know, the theory, you know, scientists. The out in space is micro meteoric bombardment taking place all the time.
yeah.
That's without the radiation problems. What's it going to take if we said, okay, let's blueprint this now? We want to take man to the moon and safely return him. What do we need to pull that off? Is it even achievable, or our meat suits are designed by something higher than us to keep us here on planet Earth and not venture any further? Or we have the capabilities of doing so, but how? Do you think would be required to be able to even achieve
Right.
at this point in time?
It is necessary to make a very big difference between us delicate little creatures, us humans, and robot satellites, equipment.
Well, robots, yeah. Seems to be doing that on Mars and all over the place.
Robots can be created to survive in extraordinarily adverse conditions. And in space they can be. I've actually had a tour of a satellite manufacturing facility. And I said to them, how do you protect against radiation? They said, it's very simple. We use enough lead in it, because they're relatively small craft, these. Only certain parts of it need to be protected from radiation. So we use sufficient lead, and we use materials which are not affected by radiation to the extent that humans are, which almost gave the game away.
Yes, that's right.
So there are satellites out there that have gone into space, stayed in space for quite a long time. And we've just heard that Voyager 2 is still transmitting.
It's still
that's billions of miles away.
It is that, isn't it?
It's probably going to run into the Kuiper Belt any minute. Get whacked by something up there. But humans, this is the difference. It's very easy to say, oh, you can put satellites into space. Yes, of course we can. That's never been in dispute.
Yes.
But can you put humans into space and get them back alive?
It's a difficult situation. We need something to protect the biologics of the human body.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, to take it into an environment where it's not designed to be.
Yeah.
For long durations of time. And under the conditions it's going to be met with, all these, I mean, the physical problems, there's the radiation issues, and that's without any problems that might take place, sort of mechanical or electronic.
Yeah.
we are stacked against us. It's like we're designed not to go. We're not supposed to be out there in a sense of speaking to that point. You
No,
know,
we're not.
and if
No, we're
it's
not.
going to be ever achievable, because they're still talking about now, they're still talking. This is the long ahead plans, is to build a base on the moon to be able to launch from there to Mars, to populate Mars. I mean, how are they going to populate Mars if there's an issue where they can't get to the moon? Because this is what they're talking about now. Unless we are dealing with some specialized technology that we currently are unaware of that allows us to have those not those we don't have those inertias and problems of going into space. But then that's another area, because we're talking about technology that shouldn't really exist if that is the case.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's always sorts of stories about technology that's 50 years ahead of the time. Well, you'd think you'd see it by now, wouldn't you? It was being used 50 years ago. Where is it? Stealth technology, possibly. That was secret at the time. But the idea that there are certain hidden technologies and hidden space forces and hidden this and hidden that, it's a good story because it makes you think, well, maybe they could do it.
Well, time's ticking, Marcus. I mean, this isn't a secret that can be forever withheld. It can't, because as time progresses, people are going to ask the question, well, what about when you said you're going to send man to back to the moon? What happens when you said you're going to send man to Mars? What's the reasons? What's the problems? Why can't we do it? Without bringing out the fact that we never did it if we, under the circumstances of not going to the moon. It's not something I can withhold forever.
No, it isn't. It isn't. It will come out. And I think it is going to come out fairly soon, because the Chinese are now pressing much harder. Because the Chinese up till now, the Chinese have skirted around the issue. They haven't addressed it. They said, we have identified parts of Apollo on the lunar surface. That's all they've said. Now, that could well be the S4B rocket.
There's nothing they could send up there. I mean, you could even put something on there, on a satellite or something, which looks like the base of the lunar lander, and drop it onto the surface of the moon and make it look like this is a location. Or they could just be simply fake photographs. Who knows at the end of the day? Nothing is improbable, especially now with artificial intelligence that can knock up an image like that and you can't tell the difference of anything, including video footage. We can have put Neil Armstrong back in the moon, and with new footage that's been found. We could do that right now with AI technology, not know the difference.
Question for you, sir. Neil Armstrong, one of the most famous Americans in history, died in 2012.
Yes.
Following an operation that didn't help. Where is he buried?
I'm not too sure where he's buried. Where is he buried?
You'd think he'd be buried where all American...
Well, did they not send him into space? Gene Roddenberry. So where they put him then, like with all the other astronauts, like Edgar Mitchell and so on?
Well, Gus Grissom is buried at Arlington National Cemetery.
Right.
That's where American presidents, American heroes, Charles Lindbergh, for instance, they're buried. No, Neil Armstrong is buried at sea off the coast of Florida.
Oh. Well, that sounds like, was there certain rulings that he can't be there, and why could he not be where everybody else had been?
I mean, technically, Neil Armstrong was a naval flyer. He was in the Navy and could legitimately request a burial at sea, which he was granted. And there's film of it, there's pictures of it, there's no dispute about it. But it does seem a little bit, shall we say, out of the ordinary. He was
it certainly does. I mean, what will be the situation with Buzz Aldrin if he passes? I mean,
Buzz Aldrin's going to go on forever. He's just married for the third time.
Oh, yeah, he's a character, he is. He really is.
Age 93, good for him.
Well, yeah, I mean, I do remember when Neil Armstrong, when he was in the UK and he was doing a radio show, and 10 minutes before going on, they tell him, they were told no moon questions. I mean, what do you talk to Neil about if there's no moon questions? I mean, it's just preposterous. We are now entering the era that man doesn't have to go to the moon because they're machine.
We
No.
can send machines. They're
Why,
just as
why would we even? Now, that's going to be the new thing. It'll be like, well, all the promises we were going to say about taking man to the moon, back to the moon, should we say, and going to Mars, we've decided we don't need to because we can do it cheaper and more efficiently by sending robots. And it'll be AI and robots that gets us out of this.
well,
Before like-
exactly. But then questions will be asked about, well, why can't you send men to the moon?
we should be able to. It was easy back then. Well, I'm not saying easy, but easy in compared to standards now with the technology we have, the computer technology, the advanced technology that we have. It would be 100 times easier to do it now than it would in the 1960s, of course.
Of course it would. Of course, but we didn't do it then, and we can't do it now. I mean, Artemis 2, you know, the Artemis program, which is a development of the Constellation program, which started in 2004. So we're talking 20 years it's taken just to get a rocket to launch to the moon. We had Artemis 1, which carried 2 crash test dummies wired up to measure the radiation. Those dummies were called Zohar and Helga.
Yes.
And they haven't released the readings.
No,
Strange.
results, no.
And the Artemis 2, which is supposed to carry humans just to orbit the moon, that's what Apollo 8 did, it's been put back another 2 years.
Yeah.
Perhaps the astronauts are saying, okay, tell me about the protection we're going to have against radiation. And they say, well, hang on a minute, we don't think we've got enough.
No,
I actually attended a lecture a few years back given by a scientist from the Harwell nuclear facility near Oxford. Basically, she was going to talk about radiation and how we're going to protect humans in space. And it was a very complicated lecture. And the answer basically was, we can't do it. So Muggins here, always asking the embarrassing question, put my hand up and said, how are the Apollo astronauts protected against the radiation in space? And do you know what her answer was? It was the luck of Apollo.
the luck.
The luck.
More than luck. Yeah.
Apollo was very lucky.
What, the whole space program? Every
Yep.
single astronaut, all 20 odd of them or whatever it was, all visited the moon apparently.
Yep, apparently. But the answer was they had to produce a magnetic field around the spacecraft to protect it from radiation. But it's so powerful.
Yeah, and on the moon as well, whilst they're there walking amongst on the surface. It's
No, Steve, don't go there. That's far too complicated. No,
yeah.
humans have never, ever flown to, landed on, walked across and returned from the moon. Never happened.
No.
It's a fairy story
Yes.
for political purposes.
So images and things then obviously be put out because people are pressing and saying, well, I want to see where it landed on the moon. So they generate information and put that out and say, oh, here's a photograph. Now, it's not the greatest of photographs, but you can see that it's something that does resemble like things that they put on the moon. And maybe the base part of a lander that went there, or moon tracks from the buggy or whatever, you know. It isn't impossible with the technology we have to have things placed on the surface of the moon. It isn't impossible to generate images because who would know? I mean, what do we even have in the public domain telescopes that could look that close to the moon to even see?
Even the Hubble Space Telescope hasn't got the resolution to identify something.
And that's the Hubble.
Yeah, that's the Hubble.
So we always have to rely on them giving us the information rather than somebody in the public domain being able to obtain the information for themselves.
There's no telescope today, even the ultra-large telescope in Chile, which is 4 telescopes operating together. Even that doesn't have the resolving power to be able to identify something so small as the lander on the moon. It can't do it. Now, at this point, somebody will say, well, the Chinese have taken photographs and they've seen it. No, they haven't. What they photographed was a surveyor craft, which was on the moon, on Apollo 12.
Yes.
Because the lunar lander has 4 legs. We know that.
Yes.
We've seen the pictures of it. What the Indians took a picture of had 3 legs, which the
Yes,
surveyor craft has.
Mm.
So forget India photographing the Apollo. The Chinese have not photographed it, or if they have, they haven't released the photographs, because they have only said we have seen evidence of Apollo on the moon. Now, there's plenty of things on the moon from Apollo,
Oh yes, yes.
such as the
Yeah. All the satellites and all the
there's plenty of things.
and all sorts. Yeah, Russia's had quite a few from there.
So the idea that the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, which flew in 2009, photographed the Apollo landing sites, that's always quoted. But
Yes.
if you look at those photographs and you think, hang on a minute, let's go back, let's just take a step back. What was the optics on the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter camera?
Yes.
It could identify something. The pixel size it could identify was 41 centimeters.
Yes.
That's about 18 inches. Now, if you ever looked at your house on Google Maps and you looked at the car outside your house, which you recognize, you'll see maybe it has a sunroof.
Yes.
You can see which way the car's pointing. And you might see some garden furniture in your back garden. You might see all sorts of things which you recognize. They're in color too.
Yes.
These lunar photographs were in black and white.
Mm.
Now, we're told that they were photographed at a height of 25 kilometers above the lunar surface. They brought the
brought it down.
That's 15 miles. Satellite above Earth photographing the objects you can see. It's called GOI-1. That's a commercial satellite.
Yes.
Photographing in 2009. The photograph I show is of the London Eye. And you can see the individual carriages on the London Eye.
Yeah.
And in the car park in the background, you can see cars and you can see if they've got a sunroof, and it's in color.
Mm.
And that was taken 400 miles above the Earth's surface through the dust and pollution of the atmosphere.
Well, 15 miles.
Forget these photographs of the lunar landing sites, of the Apollo landing sites. They're faked. There are sufficient number of people around who not only have the expertise, they have the knowledge to be able to challenge NASA.
Yes.
It was probably a necessary action at the time. As I say, you've got to put Apollo into context.
Well, something of that large and importance needs irrefutable evidence, and anything that would be of that importance, and that if they did do it, we would be sat here with irrefutable evidence. Surely we would be.
Sure. Yeah, we would.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody disputes that aeroplanes fly in the sky. They go up to about 6 miles. I've flown in one. You've probably flown in one. Most people have flown in an aircraft. Nobody disputes they work as described. Otherwise, we wouldn't get on board. An aluminium tube 6 miles up at 500 miles an hour.
This is why, because this is the reasons why this has been continued debate over this, is because it could have been all put to bed if there was just irrefutable evidence. Like, you want to end this, NASA? Irrefutable evidence on the table, and it's over by tomorrow.
Yeah. Good point. Good point. Yeah.
And it's still not. We're still now 2024, and we've still not got irrefutable evidence.
Yeah. In fact, there's less evidence. I mean, look at the number of people who are now writing books about the subject. Randy Walsh has written 2 books, 3 books now.
Mm.
Trevor Weaver has written 4 books. One I was helping him
with him. Yeah.
Bart Sibrel has done a lot of work on this.
Mm.
I mean, I do a weekly Zoom call with 2 friends in Canada, and we discuss Apollo every week, which is posted online. It's Apollo Detectives. There are Facebook pages about it, Apollo-hoax.
Yes, there's a lot. There's a lot of effort out there by people which have putting the information out. Of
Yeah.
course, places like NASA, which, okay, we say it's public domain and all that sort of thing, but really acts like a government body because it treats us like it's a government body as if we don't deserve the answers
Yeah.
for
Well,
some reason.
NASA describes itself as a civilian organization, which it is,
Yeah,
but
well, yes.
it's part of the Department of Defense.
Well, yes.
NASA launches spy satellites.
Yes.
That's not a civilian operation, that's a military operation. I mean, how many shuttle flights launched secret satellites?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Lots of them.
It is.
Why is the satellite, why is the space shuttle the size and shape it is? Because it was designed to launch spy satellites.
Yeah, it is. That's what it's designed to do. It was a carrier.
Yeah, it was a carrier for spy satellites.
Yeah, that's what it was. They all had various different functions, of course, but that's why they had numerous different ones, because they had numerous different pieces of equipment and storage facilities to house these particular satellites, or even retrieve them in some cases, because you had one that comes out and it's a big arm and it grabs
Yeah.
the satellite and brings it in,
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Brings it back so we can fix it, or
exactly.
you'd think they'd fly that thing up there and get all the.
But it should have been there should have been a split. In other words, like anything that you're dealing with on a civilian basis, you've answerable to us, not all Department of Defense under the heading, and that's the problem. It's because people, it's tax money's paid for it, the American tax money, and it's where they're going to get that money for the Apollo program.
Yeah.
When people find out that at the end of the day, all right, it'll be gone on so long now, people go, oh well, we kind of half knew it. And I think they're happy to do that now. So I think they say, well, do you know what? Let's not jump on them too much, because they're going to, all these people like yourself and many others out there trying to push the effort are softening the blow.
Yeah, that's exactly. Softening the blow. It's okay, NASA. You can front up to it and say it was a political event necessary at the time for the reasons we've discussed.
Yes, exactly.
Now it's okay to come clean and say it was actually fabricated because we had to do it at the time for political reasons.
That's right.
Okay, I agree. That's good reason to do it.
I don't think people too many will challenge it now. So they just kind of go, well, we kind of half knew that. I'm surprised, da 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 da. But at the end of the day, well, at least that's put to bed, and they move on to the next thing, is it?
There is a problem with that because, as Dave McGowan, I don't know if you read his book "Wagging the Moon Doggy."
Oh no, I haven't. No.
Center for an Informed America is his website. Dave McGowan was a journalist. He died a few years ago. His daughter now runs the website, and on that is a 24 chapter book, basically, which you can read on his website, Center for an Informed America. Nice. It's very good. And one of the points he makes in that film is, if America comes clean and says, yeah, we did fake the Apollo moon landings, that is not the problem people will have with NASA. They'll say, okay, it was done for good reason, political reasons at the time. Yeah, we understand that. The problem is that if they lied about that, what else have they lied about? Well, not just NASA, but the American government, the British government, and all the other.
I think people are pretty much aware now, that there are lots of questionable shall come to light. And of course, yes, that's absolutely. It seems to be not just the I'm not going to just point the finger at the American political scenario. It's really any country whose politics are involved, is that they will tell the general public one thing when it isn't, or just not tell them at all. Your mission is just as equally as important, so, and that does actually happen. Unfortunately, we've gone well over, but and I knew it would be, it would be marvelous, because it's absolutely fascinating. Listen, there will be people out there that have their own opinions about the lunar landings. They will listen to some specialists out there and say, yes, this is evidence that they went there. They'll listen to other people or read books and stuff. I would say you know, look for the evidence for yourself. Don't always just pick up a book because it's someone's views and opinions you're reading at the end of the day. And question, where did they get their evidence from? At the end of the day, do we really have anything that is, you know, we can say, okay, NASA have not provided anything that we can honestly say is irrefutable evidence. We are left to nitpick. A lot of researchers have done and looked into those areas, just as Marcus has, and illuminated those problematics. But then obviously anybody who's going to be watching the show might have their own opinions about that. But we'd love to hear you about, you know, about why you think these things, because it's always talk it out, always talk with others, look into the research, look at what's been done. Because sometimes, just sometimes, we discover things that, oh, I might be wrong, or I might be right, depending on what you believe. And it is good to realize that rather than just take it verbatim of what, because somebody said something, that's the truth.
Yeah.
You know, because we don't live in that society anymore. We haven't lived in that society for a very, very long time.
Right. Yeah.
But I do want to thank Marcus for coming on the show. I will be putting some links in there for his book that he co-authored with Trevor Weaver, which is the Apollo Moon hoax, the real evidence, a reference guides to the facts.
Oh, just one thing on
Yes.
as far as the book's concerned. Obviously, one needs a lot of references, and there are a lot of references. There's
Yes.
a website which carries those references.
Right. Okay. What is that website, Marcus?
Right. It's tiny. That's tinyurl.com/moon skeptics.
Okay, so it's tinyurl.com
.com
/moon skeptics.
And skeptics is spelt with a C.
Right. Okay.
SCEPTICS.
Okay. So I'll get that from this.
And there's 246 references that we use. Their websites, their films, their books, their interviews.
Fantastic.
And this is all the evidence. As I say, this is the Apollo moon hoax, the real evidence.
Yes.
That is a lot of the evidence that we have presented to demonstrate that Apollo.
Yeah, but for people who are listening, watching, they're going to be watching this. There is a place where they can go and look at this and make their own mind up. Read, you know, try and find out what the work that's been done, and we're going to give those details at the end of this video and under the comments section when it goes out. We'll be putting those links in for people to be able to go and look at that and find out more. If anybody wants to get in touch with you, Marcus, is it through the Nexus process, the Nexus magazine, or
through nexusmagazine.com is our website, and there's a contact section there. Just go there and that will reach me. That website is run from our Australian head office.
Right.
Any messages for me will be sent to me, and I will respond to you.
Fantastic. Well,
ask the question, because as Steve already said, I've spent 30 years investigating Apollo.
Yes.
And I've made mistakes, but I've come to the conclusion now that no human has ever flown to, walked across, and returned from the moon. Now, if you can prove me wrong, this is the question I always ask, prove me wrong, I would like you to do so, politely.
Yes, and would love to hear from people who do that. And I've come to the conclusion as well that Marcus has actually been investigating the Apollo moon landings longer than some of the astronauts have had a career.
Good point. Oh, thank you. Nice one.
Well, I'm trying to get that very important point over. So a big thank you for Marcus Allen for coming on to The Big Picture, and we'll be putting links in there how to contact Marcus through the Nexus magazine and where to obtain the evidence, and in regarding the website, in regarding the Apollo landings, and also the links to the actual book. And this is the Nexus magazine. If you do not already have it, you know, it's in the shops. You can actually buy it. It's a shop shelf magazine. You can order them as well. It's definitely worth the purchase. Thank you for coming on again, Marcus. We will be talking again soon, I'm sure. And in the meantime, we will be sharing the information with you once this comes out.
Thank you very much, Steve.
You're welcome.
Much appreciated.